Well, welcome everyone to the Computer History Museum. Yay! Thanks for coming. We really appreciate your attendance tonight. My name is Dan Lewin. I'm the CEO of the museum. Been here about 4.5 years, 2 of which has been kind of shrouded by COVID, but who's counting? We're very excited about tonight's program for several reasons. I'd start by offering a quick update on the mission and purpose of this institution, which we have evolved in the last few years. We will always collect and preserve the artifacts of the computing age. That's part of what we do as a history museum. But also, our focus these days is to decode technology, the computing past, the digital present, moving target, and the future impact on humanity to shape a better future. Because life as we know it doesn't exist without computing, as I think we all know. And anything that can be used at that scale can be weaponized for good or for bad. And we see both in the world today. So this program tonight and the thematic behind it, which is around innovation and entrepreneurship, I want to ground it in 2 words and the definition as I see them of those 2 words. The first is about innovation. And that, to me, is about changes in structure. It's not about the invention per se, but it's about the structural changes that the inventions actually can bring about. And technology is really about technique, how you go about doing those things. And computing technology has found its way into every facet of our lives every day today. There's just no way that you don't wake up and live and breathe based upon a world that doesn't exist without computing. So this program and the framework that the team has put together, and I'll introduce Marguerite in a moment, who's leading this effort, is around this notion of IDEA. So inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And without the support of the Kapor Center, it would be very hard for us to do a program like this, so I'd like to thank them right up front, Mitch and Frida Kapor. Their center in Oakland is an exceptional place, both for their venture investments, but also their investments in culturally diverse and very interesting entrepreneurs who've done amazing things in many different fields. So this program, I think, is an important element of our journey as an institution to go beyond the artifacts, which again, we'll continue to collect. I mean, I have to tell you that several months ago, a little less than 2 months ago, we accepted an artifact into this museum. It's called a wafer scale engine. So a silicon wafer, there's a big ingot of silicon that gets pulled out, and then they slice it real thin, and they break it up into these little chips the size of your thumbnail or smaller, and do things with them in your iPhone and everything else. This wafer scale engine is a 9-inch square plate of silicon that has 2.6 trillion transistors on it, 850,000 compute cores, 850,000 chips, of which there are maybe 6 or 8 in your iPhone. I forget the math these days. This engine can be applied using off-the-shelf software to solve problems that would take months on these hyperscale cloud computing systems, and can do it in days. So we're at this incredible juncture of the turn of the technology crank, and we need to do innovative things, and we need to back entrepreneurs with diverse points of view to help scale this and use these technologies for the greater good of the human condition, because if not us, who? So here, welcome to the Computer History Museum. Let me introduce Marguerite Gong Hancock, who will lead the program for today. Thanks so much.
Well, hello, everybody. It's so great to add my welcome to each of you, and thank you, Daniel. Innovation and entrepreneurship at the heart of what we do as we think about the exponential impact that technology can have, as Daniel said, for good or ill. And so it's a real wonderful thing to be focusing today on breaking barriers for tech entrepreneurship. This program continues our mission-driven work around capturing, preserving, and sharing the stories of remarkable tech change makers, as well as thinking carefully and trying to be part of the change that we want to see in making a more inclusive and impactful ecosystem that supports these kind of change makers. So tonight we're going to explore the stories of some remarkable entrepreneurs, look at some of the opportunities and very real challenges that exist in the startup ecosystem today, and then think about how each of us can be part of the change that we wish to see in the world. So we're going to be featuring 3 founders and 2 venture funders on stage tonight. First, we'll have Ruben Harris with a fireside chat with Eric McCarthy. Shanea Leven telling a founder's story. Then we'll break for some more networking and some new food. Chance to interact with our speakers as well as with each other, because look around, there are really interesting people here gathered tonight. And then we'll close with a fireside chat with Stephanie VanPutten together with Joe Hurd, followed by more networking. So it takes a village to create change, and I want to add my heartfelt thanks to the Kapor Center. In my role here at the museum, I help as the executive lead for programming, diversity inclusion, as well as education. And funders and partners like the Kapor Center are critical. We also thank the Kapor Capital, as well as our trustees, Joe Hurd and Angela Tran, who helped develop tonight's program. So continuing our tradition, I'm going to be introducing our speakers tonight by 5 numbers. First up, Ruben Harris. 1.4 million people who have stopped college enrollment during the pandemic, $1.8 trillion in student loan debt, 375 million career switches by 2030, 1 billion people to help in the next 10 years, and last but not least, 4, the age when he started to play the cello. We almost pulled off having him play tonight. Next time, right, Ruben? Next time. So he's a co-founder and CEO of Career Karma. Since launching in 2018, he's raised $52 million from investors like Top Tier Capital, SoftBank, Emerson Collective, and others. Earlier, he worked in sales and partnerships at Honor, Hustle, Alt School, and before breaking into tech, he was an investment banker. Many of you know him also as the co-host of the podcast, Breaking into Startups. Let's give a very warm welcome to Ruben Harris. Glad to have you here, Ruben. So who would be the right person to have here up on stage? Well, we found the perfect person. Joining him on stage to moderate the fireside chat is the VC who led his $40 million Series B round in January this year. Eric McCarthy is the associate at Top Tier Capital. He's a member of the firm's Velocity team in executing their investments. He's also on the board of Career Karma. Before joining Top Tier, he was at Omidyar Network, and previously he covered financial technology as an equity research associate. So let's give a warm welcome to Eric McCarthy. Glad you're here, Eric.
Well, thank you for those great introductions, and thank you all for being here. What's going on, man?
What's up, bro?
How you doing?
Good, man. It's been a minute.
Staying busy?
Very.
Yeah. Well, tonight's theme is breaking barriers, and obviously you and I are friends, and I know your story pretty well. And one of the things that I admire about you is just how you've done that throughout your career. But these fine folks who don't know you as well may benefit from you kind of telling your story. So can you just tell a bit about how you started Career Karma and where the company is and the things you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. So Career Karma helps job training programs find qualified applicants. I'm the co-founder CEO. We have 2 other co-founders. And Career Karma is essentially the product that we wish that we had when we were breaking into tech. We now have about 2.5 million people a month, mostly women and people of color that are looking to us for career advice, and they want to break into technology. And when you say technology, it's not just software engineering, it's sales, it's customer success, it's a lot of these jobs that are going to exist in the future, but aren't going to exist today. And we're primarily focused on skills-first training programs like boot camps. Our directory, if you go to careerkarma.com/schools, has about 500 boot camps in it, 7,000 trade schools, colleges, and universities. My co-founders went through boot camps. My brother went to a boot camp. And even Y Combinator, when we did it in 2019, is kind of like a boot camp for entrepreneurs. And what's important for us is to not just match people to these job training programs, but also to make sure that they have the support that they need. So we actually have these live audio rooms, kind of like Discord and Clubhouse had a baby, focus on careers, so they could focus on peers, coaches, and mentorship to stay enrolled in programs and then find jobs informally. And now that Top Tier and many other investors have come in for our Series B, we're actually starting to work with employers, because employers are the new hire. They're launching their own courses, they're paying for education, and they're investing in employees to make sure that they have that upward upskilling and reskilling, because you guys talked about that 375 million number. These people are going to switch careers between now and 2030. Instead of going back to college, they're going to rely on job training programs to find their next jobs. And so colleges are launching shorter form programs, employers are getting involved, and by working with Top Tier and others, and Kapor, who's been a believer from day one, and working with you all, we'll be able to help 1 billion people in the next 10 years.
Awesome. And you've raised $53 million so far. Congratulations on that. And you don't raise that type of money without breaking a few barriers. But one of the things I know you've been passionate about is one of the ways to break barriers is to not run into the barrier, right?
Yeah.
To kind of go around the barrier, right?
Yeah.
And so why don't you kind of double click on that and some of the things you've been thinking about and what you've been able to do in raising your capital or even starting your company. That's kind of avoided some of those barriers and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I love that word breaking. And I'll build up into your question. So, she mentioned breaking into startups, which is the podcast we started before Career Karma. I actually took a course called Breaking into Wall Street, which is what taught me financial modeling to become an investment banker, which is how we came up with the name Breaking into Startups. And something that we've been thinking a lot about is how, because people are going to switch careers 5 to 10 times in their lifetime, we are entering into the end of occupational identity. What that means is you can be a software engineer, a designer, a lawyer, a doctor, all in one lifetime. And when you think about that, and when we think about barriers, I think about the word that they asked me to write on my chest when I got here. And the word that I wrote down was limitless. Usually when you go to these networking events, people like to ask, who you are, where you're from, what school you went to, what do you do? A lot of times you're gonna, pat your head on your chest and you're gonna say what you do. But because you're dropping that title, that change has actually helped me do what you said from raising money. A lot of times when you're in things like YC or when you're in these different networks, they talk about how you should only focus on the general partner, for example, or you should only focus on the partners of the VC funds if you want to raise money. But the fact of the matter is, I view every single human being as valuable, and I've always treated every single person with respect. And the most valuable people to me have been not to say that the GPs and the partners haven't helped me a lot, but the associates have actually driven the largest checks in Career Karma, specifically you. Since we're talking about that right now, yeah, let's give it up to him. Yeah, it's very important. I mean, what's cool about the associates, or even outside of raising venture capital, is it's kind of like an executive assistant. Executive assistants can know everything going on with the CEO. They have these whisper networks. They know what's going on in the back channel. They understand the company politics. So by doing that, I was able to do things that a lot of people weren't able to do. And the last thing that I'll say about it is, when we had the Regular Startups podcast, something that we used to say is, if you can't go through the front door, you have to go around it, under it, over it, or through it. And that's what we've done with venture capital. So if you forget anything I just said, ignore titles, focus on the human being.
Awesome advice. And one of the stories I think is really, really great is how, initialized like the Series A. And your first contact, I don't think, worked there at the time or was tangential. Maybe you could tell that story just to give people, another side of kind of going around barriers and talking to everybody, because everybody matters. So.
Yeah, so, Initialized Capital led our Series A. Gary Tan's on our board, Kim Cutler's there as well. And what's interesting about Initialize is I've been connected to Initialize since before Initialize was a fund. When I was in college, I was using this platform called Posturous that got sold to Twitter, because I really like blogs. I was doing this one-sentence journal, and I was like, oh, wow, I could use Posturous. So I was connected to Gary even before I even moved to Silicon Valley. I was still in Tennessee at the time. So when I first moved to the Bay Area, I actually lived in this home that was started by Justin Rosenstein, who's the co-founder of Asana, who also invented the Facebook like button and GChat. And in that home, I was able to meet Kim Cutler, who was a reporter of TechCrunch at the time. And she's the one who gave me the relationship with TechCrunch so that I could feature the stories on breaking into startups on the homepage. My view when I first came to the Bay Area was the media only covers CEO stories and venture capital stories, but not the people actually building the companies. So I actually started sharing the stories of a single mom or someone that was formerly incarcerated or someone that was 50 years old that quit his job to become a software engineer. And through that process, I was able to get the attention of someone named Alexis Ohanian, who happened to, be who he is, right, with Reddit. And I asked Kim if she could help me get connected to Alexis to be on my podcast. And so when I was going to record Alexis on the podcast, he was like, I know you don't know this guy, but his name's Gary Tan. You should put him on your podcast too. And so we put him on a podcast. Ignore that. That was like 2016, 2017. I was able to talk to Gary after about breaking into startups and what I want to do in the future. But long story short, through Kim and this podcast, I was able to eventually get reconnected to them to raise this money. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes into that, but it's all relationships building. It's not titles. I didn't know who he was, and it's all organic.
Awesome. And so now with the Series B announcement, you've announced that Career Karma was going into the enterprise. Mm-hmm. So now you're staring a barrier in the face, right? Mm-hmm. How are you thinking about that?
It's a really good question. Go to market is something that people think about a lot. And something I used to be really frustrated about when I was first thinking about technology is that a lot of times most Black people are in HR roles or things that are non-technical roles, like software engineering, things like that. But now that I'm going into the enterprise and I'm working on HR, workforce development, talent mobility, and software, and selling to CHROs, most of the people that are in these spaces are actually Black. And that has been very interesting dynamic. The other interesting dynamic has been the boards. So even if you have support from the CHRO or the L&D department or the benefits department in order to get something done, sometimes you still need that CEO approval. And if you look at the Fortune 500s or the Fortune 1000, there's usually a woman or a person of color on the board that's actually pushing the importance of not just diversity, but the S and the ESG type of thing, especially as the World Economic Forum is focused on reskilling and upskilling. So by focusing on our people that are really trying to do things that aren't just low volume. So even though a lot of people have launched internships and apprenticeships, those things are great, but they tend to do things like in the 10s or 50s or the hundreds of things. But the fact of the matter is, at the beginning, he talked about the age that we're in. AI is a thing now. And so because of automation, there's billions of jobs and millions of jobs are going to be created and destroyed over the next few years. So we actually need to have scalable solutions. And what's really awesome is that I'm able to work with employers like auto companies that are investing in driverless technology. We just saw the first driverless car downstairs. Thank you for the fly-through tour downstairs. And all these cars are having to go electric. What's going to happen to all the warehouse workers, right? What's going to happen to all the grocery stores that are investing in robotics? How are we going to not just make sure that every company is a tech company, how are we going to make sure that you bring the people to the future with you? So you mentioned that number earlier. We want to have 1 billion people in the next 10 years, and I'm glad that I'm able to help do it with not just our people that are Black and brown, but just, like I said, the human race. Every single person here is our people, but it's been really cool to see that dynamic.
Awesome. And on the car ride down here, we were stuck in traffic, and one of the things we started talking about was autobiographies, and how you have started reading those and have used those, for inspiration. One of the things you said is I'm not the only person that has gone through this, mm-hmm. right? And so for the folks out there, the entrepreneurs who are staring a barrier in the face, who may not have, folks to many folks to go to. How has reading about these people kind of influenced your mindset, and what else do you do? What other strategies do you undertake to get that advice real time, and who do you look to as your personal board of directors?
Yeah, so my parents have been really big in teaching me the importance of writing. In the original blog post that I wrote before we started our podcast, the Breaking Startups blog post, and then we had a second one called The Reality of Breaking Startups, the first product you build is yourself. This wasn't a biography, but I talk about the hard thing about hard things, and one of the first things that I say is that as a CEO, the first thing you want to do is master your own psychology. There's another book that I mentioned by Chip Conley, which is called Emotional Equations, that really helps you think about your feelings in a way to feel better. For example, the quickest way to happiness is gratitude. So even though things are chaotic around, if you focus on what you're grateful for, it's easier to feel grounded. And the happiness equation is wanting what you have divided by having what you want, or gratitude divided by gratification. So if you have too much hustle in the denominator, which is ambition and growth and pushing your startup to a whole nother level, if you push it too far, that fraction gets smaller. So you want to have a very healthy balance of that, so you're grateful. But going back to the biographies, I get the same feeling of when I read a biography that I get watching a superhero movie, except the lessons from the book I can actually apply in real life. I'll give you an example. Black Panther is about to drop, right? And the first Black Panther, R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman, I have to say that, was based in Oakland, and there was a STEM center in that movie. Imagine if at the end of the original Black Panther, they said that this is real. They had an address like the Computer History Museum, and you can pull up. And instead of vibranium, we're talking about tech skills. Right? That'd be actually really powerful. So, long story short, when you watch a superhero movie, you might get very inspired, but there's not a lot of practical things that you can do today in order to get you there. So there's a lot of challenges going on in the tech industry right now, with the stock market entering into a recession, people restructuring, people make sure they have 12 to 24 to 36 months of runway, all that type of stuff. There's a war in Ukraine. But if you read these biographies, history has repeated itself. People have laid people off before. People have helped those people get laid off and get new jobs. Fun fact, if I didn't get laid off with one of my first jobs, I would have never met my co-founders, and Career Comma would have never existed today. So I think about history, and staying true to these biographies is really cool because they're like my mentors that I never met before. So if you haven't started getting serious about biographies, I highly recommend it.
So one of the reasons why we invested in the Series B is because of the vision, and not just the vision for the company, but the vision of the world that you had. Once you get on the other side of helping 1 billion people in the next 10 years. So what does that world look like from the perspective of an employee or somebody who might be underskilled? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, start small, right? So if you think about the post-secondary education system, there's about 50,000 computer science graduates a year, and about the same amount that are coming from boot camps. If you think about the numbers that we talked about earlier, it's 1.4 million less people that are going to college. There's about 20 million people that before the pandemic would enroll in college every year. There's about 14 million people that enroll in trade schools every year before the pandemic. But when you zoom out and you look at the $2.2 trillion post-secondary education system, the whole thing is unbundling. It's not about colleges versus boot camps. There's non-degree programs like eCornell. There's corporate programs like Salesforce Trailhead. There's boot camps, there's MOOCs. There's all these different things. And when you think about it from a learner perspective, we live in this age where you have so much optionality. So you can choose whatever you want from an education perspective. Employers and nonprofit organizations like 110, started by the former CEO of American Express, Ken Chenault, black guy, awesome guy, is pushing employers to drop the requirement to have a college degree. But if you want to get the skills that you need for the future, what do you choose? When you have so many options, you get caught into this paralysis by analysis, which is why we created a very simple flow where if you go to careerkarma.com/apply, we will actually understand what your background is, what your goals and your needs are, and match you to the right training program, kind of like a booking.com for your career. So no matter what education program is coming out, if you think about booking.com and the destination you're going to, that's the new role or the new company you're trying to land in. The plane that we're putting you on is kind of like that training program that gets you there, and we'll put you with a group of peers, coaches, and mentors on that plane to make sure that you get to your destination quickly and safely and in good company. When you think about the vision as well, I think it's important to think about how when remote work was launched and when you think about free agency kind of in sports, people used to play for one team for a very long time, very similar to a company for a very long time. Like you would graduate from college, you would be an accountant for 20 years. If you're Michael Jordan, you play for the Bulls, you play for years. But now you have LeBron playing for the Cavs, for the Lakers, for the Heat. Nothing wrong with that. Same thing with employees and employers. So the point is that Chris Yez, also one of our angel investors, and he co-wrote some books with Reid Hoffman, like Blitzscaling and Alliances. You're going to take these tours of duties where you go from school to school to school and company to company to company. And back in the day when you stayed at one company forever, you can go deep with that network. But as you switch careers, you still want to be tapped in to a network. So Gary Tan, who led our Series A, he said, YC is a network for founders, but Career Karma is like a YC for the people. So no matter where you go, you're going to have your people that are going to be able to get you to where you want to go, and that's what we focus on.
I like that, a YC for the people.
Yes, sir.
That's awesome. So I guess we're running out of time, but last question. What's the best piece of entrepreneurial advice you've ever gotten?
Man, that's a hard question. If I was going to summarize it, I would say I thought I was really good at communication, but I would say really learn how to master communication. And when I say communication, I'm not just talking about talking. I'm talking about, again, the remote work world. Because of the pandemic, it has caused over 1.5 billion learners to go online. It has caused the remote work world affecting 2.7 billion deskless workers to figure out how to interact. And employers have to go either fully online or hybrid. If you go fully offline, you're not going to compete in this global economy. And as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you have to learn how to communicate, not just verbally, but from a written perspective, from an audio perspective, from a video perspective. You got to know how to communicate in emoji. You got to know how to communicate in GIF. You got to know how to communicate in TikTok. You got to know how to communicate in Instagram. You need to know how to communicate in Twitter. You need to know how to communicate in LinkedIn. You need to know how to communicate in meme, all of that. And if you're not on top of that, it's gonna be challenging for you to be able to communicate your message. We're big believers that yes, technology is gonna change the world, but at the end of the day, we're creating software that connects humans to humans. And so if you want to reach people where they are, you have to reach them on the platforms that they're spending time on. So I would say master communication.
Perfect. Ruben.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you both.
Yep.
Incredible, right? So now we're going to have a chance to hear a founder story by Shanea Leven. And here are her 5 numbers. 10, the years that she's been working in developer tools. 19, age when she started coding. 500 plus books read. Not 1, but 2 bachelor's degrees. And she also is one of 100 black women who have raised more than $1 million. Shanea Leven is co-founder and CEO of CodeSee, which helps developers and teams visualize their code. It's backed by $10 million in funding from investors like Uncorked and former Heroku CEO Adam Gross. She previously led developer-focused product teams at Cloudflare, at Docker, eBay, and Google, our neighbors just down the street. And she studied business and computer science at Columbia College as well as the University of Maryland. So please join me in welcoming Shanea Leven. So glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Shanea Leven, as we talked about, CEO and co-founder of CodeSee. And my story for breaking barriers actually started with questions. I grew up in Baltimore, and when I was 7, the dairy industry came to my elementary school, and they wanted to interview a bunch of elementary school kids and asking them what they wanted to be when they grew up. And at the end of it, obviously, you have to drink milk to get there. And so at the end of the commercial, I closed it out, saying that I wanted to be president of the United States of America with a giant smile on my face and no 2 front teeth. And obviously, I do not want that job today. But my grandmother and I did something that I would never forget. We wrote to President Clinton asking him, did he see my commercial? And would he endorse me for president? And obviously, he did not. I was probably a little bit busy at the time. But that question prepared me for entrepreneurship. Because what I was actually asking myself was, well, why not me? Why couldn't I be president at 7? And obviously, President Clinton would say, yes, of course I will endorse you, 7-year-old girl that I don't know about. And of course I'd give you my recommendation. And that had a profound effect on my life moving forward. So fast forward a few years, and I find myself working in developer tools at Google and Cloudflare and eBay. And all of this leads me to another life-changing question that would prepare my entrepreneurship journey. So while working at Google, I came across a moment in time where I was at this huge, kind of devastating crossroads. And my mentor asked me, what would you do if you had all the time, money, and resources in the world? In other words, what would you do if you had no constraints? And this question broke me. I was a mess. Because as a minority, as a person of color, as a woman of color, I'm constantly being held back by constraints. Lack of resources, lack of money, lack of acceptance, lack of support, lack of inclusion. But this question stripped away layers that I didn't even know that I had. Because ask yourself, if you had all the time, money, and resources in the world, would you make different decisions? How would your life be different? Would you do the same things that you were already doing? Would you make different choices? What if all of those constraints were completely irrelevant? So hold that thought for just a minute, because I move on out of Google for reasons we won't discuss. And I move on to Docker. And I'm a senior director of products working on a feature that we had worked on for 6 months. And yeah, I don't know if there's engineers in the room. 2 days before the launch, there's a bug, show-stopping bug. So we narrowed down trying to figure out where it's trying to come from. It turns out it's coming from a part of the code base that we knew nothing about. There's no documentation. The people who wrote that part of the code base who knew about it, completely gone from Docker. And turns out, if we changed that part of the code base, it would cause catastrophic downstream effects to other parts of the system. I see some head nods, very typical, yeah? And I decided that I would try to move this forward and failed. I had 10 engineers working with me, and we spent 6 months, and the feature didn't get out. It was just wasted. Code's still there, to my knowledge. And at that moment, I yelled out in desperation, why do we not understand our code? Our code bases are giant. They're growing exponentially. People leave and change, as Ruben was saying, they change careers and they just leave their code there. So I went home that night and I thought, someone has had to solve this problem. We build SaaS products every day. Someone has had to do this. And obviously they didn't. And so that led me to my third question that would prepare me for my journey. How would I solve this problem? And for me, I'm a very visual person. For me to understand things quickly, I need to be able to visualize things. But building a company is really, really hard. It's a huge undertaking, and no one had ever visualized an actual legacy in production company code base with 13,000 files, 10 million lines of code. No one had ever visualized it before. And to get a company off the ground, to get an infrastructure company off the ground, you need venture funding, you need the technology, you need Amazon AWS. You need resources. But as I started talking to more and more people about their experiences understanding code, I was really moved by the struggle that as an industry we've created, just people trying to navigate, and we've created this for no reason. The only way to really understand code is to read it line by line, one line at a time. Visualize it, make a mental model in your head of how it works. So if you are dyslexic, if you didn't have a computer as a child, if you didn't get Legos or puzzles or Lincoln Logs, if you didn't speak multiple languages or learn music, it can make it really hard for you to get over the skill of spatial reasoning to understand code and eventually become a talented programmer. The only way to solve this problem is to just struggle through it and get that badge of honor that's it. You're a programmer, you can visualize everything in your head. That's it. But this area, this opportunity, is where we actually find a lot of underrepresented minorities, people of color, folks with disabilities, who would make excellent engineers, but our tools are failing them. Turns out, if you build better tools, people without these challenges can also benefit. And so at that moment, I had this realization, and all of my questions came rushing back and just hit me like a ton of bricks. Why not me? What would you do? Would you go for this if constraints were not an option, if you had all the time, money, and the resources in the world? And paired with my how would I solve this problem, CodeSee was the answer to this question. CodeSee helps you to visualize your code, helps you get and stay up to speed on how your code works, like she said, by visualizing it, so that you can learn parts of code, refactor it, basically ship code really, really fast. Now, we're still on our journey, but all founders struggle with this fear that you can't move forward, this fear that you have a lot of barriers. And I want to be able to leave you with, figure out what helps you to answer those questions for taking that journey, because we all actually need to move forward. And I hope that we can all break barriers together. Thank you.
So much. Great. What a story, and it's still unfolding. We're really looking forward to seeing what happens next for CodeSee. All right, well, we are going to close this evening with two more things. One small finale, but before then we have an amazing fireside chat here with Stephanie VanPutten in conversation with Joe Hurd. So, you know the drill now. 5 numbers for Stephanie. Let me bring them up here on the screen. Here are Stephanie's 5 numbers. 19,542 followers on LinkedIn. 33 years alpine skiing. You should check out her incredible career as a professional skier. 2 Burning Man experiences, 419 companies that have been audited on DEI performance. And in case you were wondering, her GMAT score, it's 740. She's the founder and CEO of Blendoor, a diversity, equity, and inclusion software as a service company, sometimes known as the FICO score for corporate DEI. Honored on the Fortune 40 under 40 list, she serves as entrepreneur in residence at the Equity Alliance and is also founder of Visible Figures. As I mentioned earlier, is one of fewer than 100 black women in the world to raise more than $1 million in venture capital. She founded Visible Figures, which is the largest network of venture-backed black women in the world. So previously she held roles at Microsoft, Lockheed, Deloitte, and TripAdvisor. So here tonight is Stephanie VanPutten. Let's give her a very, very warm welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you.
Now, who would be a great moderator? Well, we have a fantastic venture capitalist, investor, technology executive, and strategic advisor who serves on a number of public and nonprofit boards, including here at the museum. Thank you, Joe, for all that you do for the museum. He's the operating partner at SOSV, a $1.4 billion early stage venture fund where he leads strategy and business development across a number of sectors, including life sciences, deep technology, and consumer-facing mobile. He's also a venture partner at Good Growth Capital, a women-led venture fund. And he built his career at Facebook, at Gannett, and AOL Time Warner. Also, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, as well as the Trilateral Commission, and more. He served under the Obama administration as a senior political appointee in the Commerce Department with a focus on international trade policy. So, here tonight to lead this fireside chat is Joe Hurd. Let's give him a very, very warm welcome.
Stephanie, good to see you. Marguerite, thank you so much.
Take it away. We're glad that you're here in conversation.
Okay, the ticker is on. Good evening, everybody. Let's try that again. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Fantastic. I was raised in the church. I love a little call and response just to get things started. Amen, right? Can I hear an amen? Stephanie, it is an honor and a pleasure to have you on stage. I've been watching you for the last 5 or 6 years, and to all of you in the audience, after you hear her story for the next 20 minutes, you'll understand why I'm such a fan. She's a CEO, a founder, an activist, and you've been an advocate for change on many different fronts. So we only have 20 minutes. Let's jump right into it, right? And as part of my research, I went and looked at a TED Talk that you did in 2019. If you haven't seen Stephanie's TED Talk, I highly encourage you to find it. It's on YouTube. And in that TED Talk, I want to make sure I get the quote exactly right, so I'm going to look it up on my notes. But you talked about America being less the land of opportunity and more the lottery of birth. Tell us what you meant by that.
It has emerged as such. It hasn't always been that way, but there's data that shows upward mobility has declined significantly since the 1930s. And so the zip code you were born in actually has more to do with your economic trajectory than any other factor, race, socioeconomic background, et cetera. And so I have kind of dedicated my life career in disrupting that, figuring out creative hacks to ensure that where you were born, the gender you were given, the race you were assigned, has less to do with your success in this country, because that's how we all win. That's my thesis.
And in terms of, if the theme of tonight is breaking barriers, you had to break quite a few barriers to even get out here where you are today, right?
Yes. I have very humble beginnings. Though we call America the land of immigrants, I am not a descendant of immigrants. I am the descendant of American slaves. And so there are a lot of downstream effects of that. My father was incarcerated as a result of the war on drugs. My mother was actually homeless for a brief period, despite being a college graduate in the 80s, due to Reaganomics. And so, my life as a product of a single mother born on welfare was extremely challenging in terms of getting access to resources and frankly just being accepted as a valuable American citizen. Fortunately, my aunt was a computer science at the University of Maryland, and so I was able to kind of follow in her footsteps. I started coding at 13 through a nonprofit called Black Data Processing Associates, and this was in the late 90s, and took AP Computer Science in high school, moved to Palo Alto at 17 to attend Stanford, and the rest has been history.
Fantastic. Wow, well, that's a pretty amazing story. Thanks. It got in Canada as well, right? But then after Stanford and a graduate degree at MIT, you had to enter the workforce, and you started working, right?
Yes, well, I've always been working. I'm not sure if any of you have worked for your parents, but my mom has always been an entrepreneur, so I've always been working. I had an internship every single summer of undergrad and worked for Microsoft for 5 years before quitting to go to MIT. But I actually did not do any recruiting at MIT, Sloan Business School, because I knew I wanted to start a company, and I know how easy it is to get comfortable when you get that big salary coming out of business school. So I very intentionally decided to immerse myself in the startup and venture ecosystem.
Fantastic. So we're going to talk about that with this next question, because as you all remember earlier, perhaps you might have remembered earlier this evening, Dana was talking about CHM's, the Computer History Museum's mission around using technology to promote structural change. And you founded Blendoor to counter bias in the hiring process. Tell us a bit about the Blendoor story.
Yeah, so about 6 months after I graduated from MIT, I had a previously failed startup. And so the natural thing was to apply for a job at Google. And I went through about 3 rounds of interviews, thought it went really well. But the recruiter came back and said, you're not quite technical enough. We'll hang on to your resume.
This is after Stanford Engineering and MIT.
And MIT. And mind you, I've been coding since 13. Like, I don't know if you guys know what QBasic is, but that's how far back I've gone. And so it was just an eye-opener. I politely declined because I know what happens is they put a lot of technical women in these sales and marketing roles that have very limited trajectory. Mm-hmm. So I declined and decided to figure some things out. But then later they released their diversity numbers. Come to find out it was only like 25% women at the time, 2% Black, 3% Latino. And the narrative was it's a pipeline problem. Having grown up in tech with a very robust and diverse ecosystem, I just knew that wasn't the problem. And so it seemed very sensible for me to build something that could remove the friction, however possible, for Silicon Valley employers to get access to diverse talent. And that started off with removing names and any indication of race, gender, and nationality from resumes and profiles, and evolved over time, which we can talk about. But yes, I very clearly identified a problem based on my own personal and lived experiences, mm-hmm. and was fortunate to have the technical background to produce a minimum viable product.
So you come up with, you see a need in the marketplace, you come up with an idea, you found a company, but then you've got to get it funded, right?
Yes.
So tell us about some of the barriers that you encountered, and we heard a little bit about this earlier from Ruben, some of the barriers you encountered as you tried to raise money for the company.
Yeah, I'm still working through this, Joe, so give me a moment.
I think there's a bottle out there. We can have a bottle on stage if you want to.
Fundraising was by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and I've been married, divorced, obviously all sorts of challenges throughout my life. So at the time of me starting this journey, there were only 12 Black women in the world that raised $1 million. Fast forward, we're up to about, I'd say 10x that, but I think we had Ruben on stage who raised $53 million. There are only 5 Black women who've raised that amount of money, ever, in the world, right? So I recognized very early that I was coming up against a big wall. I didn't understand the dynamics of why it was so challenging, because challenging for everyone. But ultimately, we were able to raise a little over $2 million in venture. But throughout that process, I realized that unconscious bias permeates throughout every domain, every level, and there are not so direct ways that you can mitigate that bias. So that was a...
Yeah. What are some of the ways you can mitigate the unconscious bias and funding?
So one of my first institutional investors was a South Asian man, Nitin Rai, and he came to Silicon Valley in the 80s when Indian men weren't necessarily leading Google in the UK as they are now, right? So he actually explained to me just the journey of changing bias and kind of taking an all hands on deck approach. So Thai Angels is a Indus-focused angel investing group that is now controlling a tremendous amount of capital. So I think one, getting access to capital by any means necessary is key because it changes the incentive structure. Because I think on our own, it's hard for us to just flip the way that we think about people based on our own lived experiences and all the information we're being fed. So that's one. Also changing the information we're being fed, right? Content plays a big factor in it. And then just doing what we can to win. Ultimately, there have been a lot of shifts in terms of gender and race in a lot of different industries, and it just comes from success cases, success stories, such that we no longer have such a narrow view about who is equipped to be successful at a thing.
Mm-hmm. So meeting investor after investor, on your quest to raise the capital for Blendoor, what's the best piece of advice that you received during the process?
Probably one of my mentors, he's a private equity guy in Chicago, and he said, Stephanie, you can't compare yourself to the guys you went to undergrad with. Because one of my classmates is Kevin Systrom, the founder of Instagram, like literally took final exams with this dude, right? And he sold Instagram to Facebook while I was in business school. Like, how did you do that, right? And so it took me a while to realize that my starting line was a significant factor. And we oftentimes as overachievers get caught up in this comparison game, but it can be it can significantly impact your psyche. I tell people sometimes I would suffer from like identity dysmorphia, like just the feedback that I was getting from the market wasn't consistent with the way that, I saw myself. So the best feedback I've been given for sure was keep things in context, focus on what you can control, and be an inspiration for those that have a similar background.
So that feeds right into my next question, because as you're on this journey, right, you're the CEO trying to get your company off the ground, you're out there talking to investors, you already know that you're one of 80 or 100 black women that are raising this type of capital, right? And you took on another mission to bring people together of similar background. Black women that have raised venture funding, Visible Measures. Tell us about that.
Visible Figures.
Sorry, Visible Figures.
Yeah, it's a play off Hidden
apologies.
Figures,
Yep.
the movie. I started Visible Figures in 2017 as a result of the Project Diane report, which found that there were only 12 black women who'd raised $1 million or more. And what started off as just like a listserv, a Google group, evolved into this like amazing network of venture-backed black women, because we all realized we were having very similar experiences with VCs, with accelerators, with employees, which is not something a lot of people talk about in the Me Too movement. But we realized if we were able to stay connected, I liken it to, a lot of people don't know this, but trees communicate underground. And there's all sorts of resources and information that they share through their roots. And so that's kind of how I think about Visible Figures. We are communicating, we're connected, it's underground. We don't need to be flashy about it, but it's been a very important way that we've been able to sustain ourselves in an environment that is really not built for people like us to succeed.
So if there's someone in the audience that could be a candidate for Visible Figures or may know somebody, how do they?
Oh, just find
How
me.
do they get connected?
Find me. And chances are I already know about you because I'm really aggressive. I liken it to like Pokemon. I just got to catch them all. Like I've been very, very intentional about my pursuit.
Is this something that's only in the United States, or we started to take the show on the road as well?
International. We have women in Amsterdam, the UK, Nigeria, Kenya, working more on Latin America, but yeah, all over the world.
So when you're in a role and a position that you've been in for so long, where you're leading a company you're talking to investors, you're motivating other women who are on similar journey paths. That can take a lot out of you, right? And sometimes we can be a barrier to our own success. How do you stay centered? How do you stay grounded? Where do you get your energy from?
That's a good question. I
get one good question a night. Now I'm done. done.
Well, fortunately, all that I do has a common thread, right? I say my mission in life is to pluralize the archetype of genius, right? I've mentioned this already. Like, I do not think the vessel that you were born in, the country you were born in, the language that you speak should in any way inhibit your trajectory, particularly in the age that we live in now, where you just have access to so much information. So the fact that everything I'm doing is pretty much in line with that has helped. But other than that, I really try to stay connected to my culture and my community. It's been a challenge, particularly moving from DC to Palo Alto, which, DC is, Prince George's County in particular, is like one of the wealthiest Black counties in America. So imagine the closest thing to Wakanda, I grew up in it. Moving to Palo Alto was a stark contrast. So I had to be very strategic in the ways that I stay connected to my culture and my community, because that's where I got energy. Else, it almost felt like, a detachment.
Yeah,
and I
fish out of
needed
water.
that mooring, I needed that anchoring to keep going.
So how are you intentional about doing that, about staying connected to
Visible figures
Yeah.
Is a big one. I also, try to immerse myself in content that is uplifting, which is hard, as I'm sure a lot of you know. Some people have had to take some social media breaks and things like that, but I've tried to be very strategic about the information that I ingest, almost like the food I ingest,
Sure.
because it's a very important part of my mental health.
That's huge. Yeah, and a lot of people don't make the connection between what you read and listen to and what you see, and really paying attention to how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
And being very intentional about that is pretty important. I'm going to try to weave a couple of different threads together, and I'm going to go on a limb here because this one may come at you from left field. But when you look at the hiring process and you try to suss out diversity in the hiring process and then provide a solution to companies, that was Blendoor, right? And then you had a number of challenges in trying to raise money as a Black woman. What would a Blendoor for VC look like?
Ooh.
Like, would you ever go and assign venture funds a diversity FICO score based on their funding profiles?
So,
I see Eric starting to get a little shift in the seat a bit. Sorry to call you out, brother.
So that's actually a good question, because we pivoted to metrics and this FICO score, right? Which I actually think has more applicability in venture than it does in corporate, because of this growing ESG, and particularly the G around governance. Like, the SEC is now demanding more public companies to disclose their people metrics, and usually the private markets will follow the public. So I imagine a Blendoor for VC almost replicating Sarbanes-Oxley, like some level of rigor, requirements, regulation on how companies are measuring, reporting, and improving on their ability to attract and retain talent across different communities, and also improve those communities, as we know that it's essential to sustainability.
And would you sum that up in a score, or would it be sort of a red, yellow, green? What would the output be?
It would be comparable to financial metrics, right? I went down a rabbit hole on the evolution of S&P and Moody's. So there was a time when companies did not have a standard for reporting their financials. It was kind of the wild, wild west of you communicating to your investors about how well you're doing. And it took time. It took almost 100 years for us to come to a consistent way in which you report, and therefore are judged on these standards. So I think the same thing needs to happen, maybe not in the form of a credit score per se, but there needs to be a level of maturity and governance around how these things are being measured, now that we all know that it impacts your return on investment, return on equity, and your growth.
Fantastic. We've got 3 minutes left. I want to just close with two fun questions. And one question that I often like to ask people like Stephanie that have accomplished a lot in a relatively short period of time: what do you know now that you wish you knew when you started out?
It's not a meritocracy.
Yeah. What do you mean
It's
by
not
that?
a meritocracy. So as much as we would love to believe, I think especially in this country, which I love, that if you just put your head down and work and you're the best at that work, you will succeed. There's so much more to it. There's so much social capital, relationships, timing, luck. It's just a whole smorgasbord of things that impact how well you shape up in this life. And so I think had I known that early, I wouldn't have been as heartbroken about certain things and maybe not have honestly, I wouldn't have even over-invested as much in STEM. STEM was really big when I was growing up.
You're focused on the merit. You study hard, you get
right.
the A.
And it was in the 90s where everyone was saying black kids need to code.
Yep.
So we're still talking about it 30 years later, right? But it was very clear in my mind that if I wanted to climb the social economic ladder, I needed to learn to code. But now that I'm here and I'm looking at my peers and recognizing how if they would have just taken a little bit more social studies, a little bit more psychology, a little bit more history, we might not be in this age of disinformation that we are in. So I wish I would have known just a little bit more nuance and complexity of the game that we're playing early on.
I've got a high school senior who's applying to colleges right now, and she might want to spend some time with you and get a few of those life lessons, make us all a bit better. Okay, the last question is, my colleague Marguerite talked earlier, we're all in this room talking about breaking barriers, and she encouraged all of us to be the change we want to see in this world. So with that in mind, what are one or two pieces of advice you give to folks in the audience based on your experience?
Ooh,
What do you want people to know as they walk out the door?
What I want people to know is actually similar to what Ruben mentioned in terms of like seeing the human, not the title. But even beyond that, like I really think we all possess really amazing gifts and talents that are not always in accordance with the way that we look or where we're from. It's partially why I'm really excited about the metaverse in terms of our ability to show up as avatars, and however we see ourselves is how we show up. Because I think leaders of the future will have an ability to see through and see past your identity in order to really pull out the talent, the skills, the empathy that you possess. So if there's anything I want you to walk away from is if you can develop that superpower to mitigate all the bias you have when you meet somebody in those first 2 minutes and just get to know them, understand their background, understand why they've made the decisions that they've had, you'll be at an advantage.
And see, people, that is why I've been following Stephanie VanPutten for the last 6 years. Let's right on time. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And you did it. Well done.
You did it.
All right.
We don't want this evening to end, but we do have one more thing. We call it the one word. So Joe, I'm going to invite you to join us in just a minute.
Problem.
And Stephanie's going to stay up here. Shanea, Kana, Ruben, you've each got
You're good.
a board. We have this tradition here called one word. We ask each of our speakers or other people who have become part of our collection, what is one word of advice that you would give? And so let's start with you, Ruben.
The word that I have on my shirt is limitless. I really like what Stephanie just said around how leaders of the future will be able to see through and see past your identity. I was listening. And I also think that as leaders, one of my angel investors, Nick Caldwell, he says, leaders are responsible for what happens next. So if you all are here, just remember that we're all limitless. Human potential is the greatest untapped resource, so there is no limits, and let's do that.
Great, thank you. Shanea, let's have the reveal.
Yes, my word is counterintuitive. So we're all on our own unique journeys. We're all trying to move forward, but we've talked a number of things about breaking barriers, and some things that we do instinctively can actually be counterintuitive when we actually get out there and try it. So just give yourself the space to be able to experiment, try, and really learn what pushes you and your teams and the world forward.
Nice.
Great, thank you.
And I'm aggressive, so my word is a verb, evolve. For the most part, our human hardware has been the same for hundreds of years, but our software is changing. And though I do believe in survival of the fittest, I think a lot of it has to do with adaptation. So as we move into this fourth industrial revolution, I think those who are able to evolve their software, their thinking about who deserves to have sufficient quality of life are going to win. So evolve your software.
All right. Panel?
Well, thank you all. Please stay put. And I'd like to invite Eric and Joe back up on the stage as well and thank them for coordinating and moderating these programs. So please join me. Well, just to wrap things up, there's a couple things that we'll like to ask of all of you in the audience. There's a QR code, I think, that's going to surface on the screen in a minute. We really value your input. This is a learning institution, and it's our goal to learn from you what you experienced and what may be important takeaways for you from tonight's program. So please take a moment, to the extent you've got a phone, leave that up for a minute and give people a chance to get their phones out. That would be great. I appreciate that. I personally, walked away with some really important things that had resonated with me and hopefully with all of you. This notion of suspending disbelief. As an entrepreneur, as an investor, we've seen both on stage, and the ability to communicate on context. And I think I heard, and you have probably all felt the same thing, that the books you read, the people you meet, the connections you make, it's more important than the technology. That's a means to an end. And it's the relationship frameworks and the fearlessness, the ability to suspend disbelief, which is pretty fundamental. And programs like this are, our desire and goal is to codify this in our archive for the museum, for posterity, for this moment in time in society where it's more fundamental than ever that we think about structural change, we think about how technology can be helpful. It's always been the case. I'll close with a little story, and then there's an opportunity for everyone to mingle hereafter as well for another half an hour or more. But about 100 years ago, if you looked at a picture of New York City, you would have seen streets filled primarily with horses pulling carts, and a lot of people behind those horses doing a job, picking things up. Within a 20-year period of time, structural steel came about and high-rises occurred. Horses went away. Henry Ford did his thing, if you will, with the shipping crate becoming the floorboard for a car and every person being able to afford a car, quote unquote, on a living wage of the day, which was maybe $1 or $2. And the end result was over a 20-year period, there were people pushing buttons in elevators and asking you what floor you wanted to get off on and those kinds of things. There was fundamental structural change going on within more or less a lifetime. There are people who were alive back then who are still alive today, pretty much. Not too many, but a few. And we're seeing another one of these shifts at an incredible level. And this time it's more about the barriers that have been built through this massive concentration of wealth. And I think the redistribution of the capital and the opportunity is what will make society a much better place. So I thank you all for what you did, the lessons you presented, and the opportunity for all in the audience to learn from that. So again, thank you all for what you did tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you so choose, you could go to computerhistory.org. There's a little join and give button up there. For $15, you can become a member. And thanks to the Kapor Foundation for supporting this and the Kapor Center for supporting this, but it's members and people like you who help us as well. So thanks again, everyone. Great.